Yo guys, it's Rumbling Man here, and in today's video, I'm going to show you the ones that got away. So make sure you stay with me. So guys, I'd like to welcome you to the Rumbling Man channel. This is a bass and guitar channel where we review basses, guitars, related equipment, all of the above. Do some tutorials and even some fun videos like this one. Of course, this one might be fun for you, but this one totally sucks for me because we're talking about the ones that got away, all right? Now, what I'm referring to is the basses, okay? The bass guitars that got away, because honestly, like any musician in my day and time, I have owned many basses and guitars. Do I still own many basses and guitars? I have some, but for every one that I have, there's at least another one that I no longer have. Have you ever sold or traded a great bass guitar and then later regretted it? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about your ones that got away, all right? So I'm gonna give you a little journey through mine. I need to take this trip down memory lane so I can heal from these basses, and I'm taking you with me, all right? So I've got 11 basses that got away today to tell you about. And we're gonna go in order, starting from the one that was furthest back in the past and gradually get more recent. It might not be perfect order just for memory's sake and technicalities of life over the years, but it'll be close, all right? So here we go. We're gonna start with number 11 today. Bass that got away was a Fender. It was a dark blue, kind of a purplish blue, made in Mexico jazz bass. It was a Mexican standard, and it was the first bass I ever bought. I had grown up playing basses. My dad had a Gibson Grabber when I was a kid that is now in this room. You know, I knew that I was going to play bass live some and stuff, so I decided to get a bass. And my friend John Howard from the band Squire set it up for me. I bought this bass in Franklin, Tennessee, at a music shop in downtown Franklin, Tennessee, at an old, kind of a historic home or something like that. I don't remember for sure what it was called. Maybe Schuff's or something like that. I didn't know, about the pickups and that. I played both the jazz and the precision, and to me the jazz felt like it was really friendly to my hands. So that's what I bought, and I bought this thing for $300. So I had this bass for probably a year or two. I used it live on some gigs around Nashville. It moved around the country with me some, but I eventually sold it to a friend somewhere in Colorado because I had gotten another bass and wasn't digging or needing this one. So rest in peace, Fender, made in Mexico, blue jazz bass. So next in my saga of bass history, a real jewel here that is going to be number 10 today that I probably acquired almost 10 years ago would be a Fender American Standard Precision bass. I had my eye on this bass for a long time. I was working hard, singing and playing on the road, and I really wanted this bass, but I couldn't afford it. Right, I couldn't shell out the $1,300, but then I had a friend very kindly say that she would match every dollar I could put toward it. So I think I put $600 up or something, and she matched the other $600. Very kind of that friend to do that. And so I got it. It was very cool. I traveled with it, played it live some, played it on some studio stuff. But here's what happened. So 10 years ago, I didn't really have the knowledge that I have now in terms of different basses and the ins and outs of what they do. But I eventually realized that, the P-bass neck at the time, now I wouldn't be this way now. Now I love P-bass necks, I really do. But at the time, the P-bass neck was a little thicker than I could get around quickly. So I'd be jamming, with my brother at home, and I just couldn't get around on it so well. And I knew the jazz bass had a thinner neck profile, so I actually traded eventually the Fender American Standard P-bass. I met a guy in a parking lot somewhere in Nashville, Tennessee, and I traded it for an American Standard jazz bass, which is going to be number 9. It was using this bass that I started to really learn about basses, because I was like, okay, well, you would have the Fender, the P-bass had the one pickup, but this has different knobs. This has 3 knobs. So I started to learn, about pickups and what it did. I loved the maple fretboard. I actually had this jazz bass for a long time. I played it a lot. I played it a lot on a lot of my early YouTube stuff when I eventually started a channel. I played it live some. Actually, I played it on some gigs, some band gigs in Seattle. I played it on some gospel things around the country. So it was a great bass, always sounded great. It never let me down, and I eventually traded it for a bass I'm going to tell you about in a little bit. But long before I traded that jazz bass came bass number 8. And when you talk about the ones that got away, this kind of surprises people when I say, you know, this is the one I kind of really miss of the ones that got away. But this bass went a lot of places with me, and so I had the jazz bass, but I thought, you know, I should have 2 basses. So one day in Memphis, Tennessee, in the Cordova area, I bought a Squire Classic Vibe 60s precision bass in Sonic Blue. And I'll tell you what, to this day, I do miss that bass. It was nice. I loved the vintage tinted maple gloss on the back of the neck, rosewood fretboard. I eventually put a pearl pickguard on it, and this bass was really awesome. In fact, it was still with me when I eventually moved to Seattle. And in Seattle, I used to do some studio sessions, and I would play, you know, for various bands in the studio and live. And I found in the studio that, you know, I would take it and a couple other basses with me, but on some of those rock songs, especially like something I was using a pick for, it could kick better than my other basses could kick. Like in the studio, I preferred it on just about every single song. And this bass is really what made me fall back in love with the precision bass and become, you know, a P bass guy for quite a while. The Squire, I had it for a long time, used it a ton, but eventually I had my job had fallen through. I wasn't getting very many gigs, and my wife and I were just kind of trying to survive. And I sold it, you know, on a hillside in Washington State somewhere, and have always missed it. I don't regret selling it because, you know, I needed money, but, you know, I've always missed it. So someday I'll get another one of those, the Squire Classic Vibe 60s precision bass. Bass number 7 that actually came into my life before I got rid of that precision bass, when I was actually kind of collecting quite a few models because I had a job and I could afford to do so, you know, singing and playing on the road, and then doing gigs and studio things around Seattle and stuff. One day I was in a music store in Snohomish County, Washington. Now, being a Tennessee guy originally, you know, that was a far cry from everything I had known, but, you know, I had moved up there. And I had been interested in Music Man for a while just because I had seen Flea play them, and I thought they looked so cool. It seemed like they had a cool sound. So I saw hanging way up, I saw this red Music Man Stingray bass. It had a matching headstock, and it just totally had my name on it. I probably went to that store and played that thing 3 or 4 times before I ever bought it. But eventually, enough was enough. I couldn't take it anymore. So eventually, I got the money together, figured it out, and bought the bass. Around the time that I started playing with bands around Seattle, you know, I'd be at a rehearsal and I'd have 2 or 3 basses with me, you know, my jazz, my precision, my Stingray. And I noticed one night that my Stingray didn't, even with the active circuitry, it didn't kick the way my jazz bass did. And my jazz bass didn't kick the way my P bass did either. But the jazz bass had more kick than the Stingray. And then I started noticing when I would go do studio things that I was never really picking up the Stingray. It just didn't have the kick that my Fenders had as much as I loved it. So eventually I decided, well, okay, I'm not using this thing a whole lot, so I'm gonna trade it and get another jazz bass so I can have 2 jazz basses in the arsenal. Stupidest thing I've ever done. Stupidest thing I've ever done. Like now, it's like if I could have 3 basses and one could be a jazz, one could be a precision, one could be a Stingray, I'd be cool with that, because the jazz bass that I got wasn't much different than the one I already had. So kind of a stupid trade, in my opinion, but still, it was a trade. And that's how I came across number 6, which was a Fender Mexican-made Classic Series 70s jazz bass. I had always seen, you know, 70s jazz basses. I knew that Elvis had like a 72 jazz bass. You know, I admired 70s jazz basses. To me, they were the definition of slap funk and, you know, trebly bass playing from the 70s. And I just thought, I'm going to trade this thing for a 70s jazz bass. That's what I did one night in Washington State. But the 70s jazz bass, the thing was, I couldn't get it in playing shape. You know, by this time I had learned quite a bit about basses. I had even started to learn a little bit about setting up, you know, truss rod adjustment, saddles, all that stuff. I didn't have a tech though at the time, and I couldn't get this thing playing right. And to this day, I attest that the 70s style basses, I find, and I've even heard, I think I've heard others say, they're a little harder to adjust. The necks are a little harder to get right. And I liked this thing, held it in some pictures with a band, but I just couldn't get the action right. And then I started waking up and realizing, why did I get another 4-string Fender jazz bass? I already have one. It's not like I have 20 basses. Why did I get another one? And so then I decided, you know what? It is so stupid that I got this thing. So I sold it, and then I went to a guitar center and decided to buy another bass with the proceeds of the sale. And that's how we come across number 5. Bass that got away was a Schecter Stiletto Diamond Series Extreme 4. This bass was unlike any bass I had ever bought because I was always very clearly, passionate about the Fender style models. I was impressed by the tone, and it was active. I think it had a 3-band EQ. In fact, in my early YouTube days, sitting in my house one day, I reviewed this bass, and I really loved it. I would plug it up at rehearsals and play it. I loved the cool, sparkly tones I could get with this thing. It was really cool, and I really enjoyed my time with this thing, but eventually I just kind of realized that what I really wanted was more of a Fender style bass profile, and I realized that I don't know, for some reason I decided I didn't like the active circuitry. My whole thing would be different now. I think back on some of these decisions and they were so stupid. Dean Hillsborough single pickup bass. This bass, I actually found it at a music store somewhere in Idaho. My wife and I had just gotten married, and I was on the road and I didn't have a bass with me, needed a bass, called and said, hey honey, I kind of want to get this, it's a bass, I kind of could use one right now. And she said, you know what, if it's something you think you need, go for it. So God bless you, Mrs. Rumblin' Man. But it was a single humbucker bass, similar to the Eric Bass model by Dean, but not exactly. But I actually loved it. It had a maple neck and fretboard. It was not gloss, more of an unfinished feel, but I still really liked it. I had this bass for a long time, and I would play it on some shows in Seattle, and I just loved the way it sounded coming through my amp, man. The active circuitry was like 2-band EQ. I would play with the band, and I had a Fender Rumble, like a 350 or something, a big Fender Rumble amp. And so for shows, I just love the way that bass sounded, because I would think for like a humbucker, that's active, I would think it'd be best for slapping and popping. But man, for rock, really digging in, especially like with a pick, it sounded so great. One of the best bass tones I've ever gotten was with that Dean Hillsborough bass. And I had that bass for a long time. In fact, that bass made it here to Florida with me. I eventually sold it because I was just kind of, same thing. I had a job, but I was just kind of needing money, kind of needing some extra money for bills and expenses. So I did sell it to a young guy, but I hope the bass has been a blessing to him wherever he is. So bass number 3 that got away is actually one you've probably seen a few times here on the Rumblin' Man channel on YouTube if you've been with me for a while. This bass was an SX Ursa 1. I had seen Max Proud's videos about SX basses, and as I was first digging into YouTube, I thought, man, I gotta check one of these out, because I've got a Squire, got a Fender, I had all these different basses, but I'm like, I gotta check out one of these SX basses. So I ordered it actually from Amazon, because there was a time when you could get basses from SX on Amazon. I guess maybe Rondo had an Amazon store or something, I don't know. But I reviewed it here on the Rumblin' Man channel. I kept flat wounds on it a lot of the time, took it on the road with me. I played it around Seattle some, and I really loved this bass. I tried to make little upgrades to it here and there. Never did replace the pickup, but it was with me for years. In fact, it was with me here in Florida, and I did a comparison with it. I put it up against, just a couple years ago, I did a comparison video with it against their jazz bass style model that I had at a church. And this particular bass was just really cool. Honestly, I loved the cosmetic vibe about it, but eventually what I did was I traded it to my good friend Ed, because Ed was willing to trade me a number 2 Yamaha BB bass. So yeah, I did a bass trade with Ed in Tampa, Florida, obviously after my time living here, and Ed had a Yamaha BB that he let me make a video with that I really fell in love with, and he's like, tell you what, you know, I'm kind of losing out on this, but I'll trade you this Yamaha BB. If you'll give me this SX, I'll use it as a project bass. So thank you, Ed, for trading me a great Yamaha BB bass. That was my go-to bass for years. Honestly, it had killer tone, one of the best sounding basses I've ever had or played. But I decided to sell it to get another bass. And I was going to use the money for another bass, but it was like just before COVID hit, and I was kind of out of work for a while. And so I used the money to live on and didn't buy another bass with that money. So guys, if you're enjoying this walk down Rumblin' Man's memory lane, go on and hit the like button. And if you like videos about basses, go on and subscribe. We're going to talk about number one bass that got away, all right? And this is a bass that I really loved. Remember the Fender American Standard jazz bass that I said I eventually traded? Well, one night in Seattle, Washington, I traded that jazz bass. After some years of just loving this jazz bass, somebody offered to trade me something that I had seen online a ton and really wanted. It was something of slightly less value, but I was down to lose out a little bit. I traded it in a hotel lobby for a Fender road-worn precision bass. Now, these are made in Mexico, but I had become such a lover of the P bass. Obviously, I had always fancied road-worn, and I loved that road-worn bass. I played it on sessions in Seattle. I played it live in Seattle. To me, it totally had the feel of a bass that really was from the late 50s. It was set up just like the basses of the late 50s. It was awesome, and to this day, you know, it'd be cool to still have it. I love the anodized aluminum pickguard. Problem was, eventually, with no work, when I had kind of had my job situation fall through, I was, you know, in Washington and needed money, and was looking toward moving to Tennessee, and didn't really have very many options, so I sold that bass. My wife and I, when we moved to Florida, we spent some time in Tennessee first, but when we moved to Florida, we came here with nothing. I came here with one bass and one acoustic guitar and, you know, one electric, maybe two electrics. And, you know, we came here with very little, and then now, years later, I've got more electric guitars than I need. I'm building my bass collection back up. I've got more acoustic guitars than I need. So God has definitely blessed. So I don't regret, you know, a mile of the bass journey. So guys, I'd love to hear about the basses that got away from you. So feel free to chat with me and share with me in the comments. Would love to chat bass, as it's one of my very favorite subjects, okay? Thanks so much for checking out this video today. Again, the thumbs up button would help me out. Subscribing would help me out. If you want to be a patron, Patreon links are in the description of the video, as well as social media and some product links to where you can check out some of these products that are still able to be checked out. All right, guys, so thanks so much, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.